Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the LGBTQ Consortium. My name is Kim Hunt, and I'm Executive Director of Affinity Community Services. Affinity is a social justice organization that's housed on the south side of Chicago, and we work with and on behalf of Black LGBTQ communities, queer youth, and allies. And joining me today is someone who I just adore, and am so happy to have her here today on the show. Her name is KOKUMO Kinetic, and you're going to learn so much about her and the work that she's doing in Chicago and beyond, right? So I want to remind folks that this is a call-in show and we're live. Please call 312 738 1060. So let's get started. Kokomo, tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's start there. Talk about who you are and what you do, and then we'll move into what's going on this weekend and the other things that you're working on.
No problem. Hello, everybody. I am Kokomo, and I was just telling Kim earlier that I don't like to talk about myself as much as people think I do. I love talking about my work. But in a nutshell, I am a proud Black trans woman from the south side of Chicago. I am also a proud Black trans woman entrepreneur, and I do everything that I do, which is social justice and media work via my company, my production company, KOKUMO Media Inc., that uses music, film, literature, and philanthropy to illuminate the experiences of TGI people of color, but specializing in art dedicated to Black trans women.
So you've mentioned the word trans a couple of times. So tell me why that trans identity is so important for you to highlight in addition to being a Black woman.
Thank you so much for asking that, because I feel like as a trans woman, I feel like we are in a moment in time where transness, specifically trans femininity, is taking space in the media, and that's beautiful. But I feel like what people want is for people to just talk about being trans. They don't want to talk about that intersectionality, you know, and how I'm not just a trans woman, I'm a Black trans woman. And quite frankly, me being trans isn't the bane of my existence. Sometimes the burden comes from me being Black, you know, like in all honesty, because I'm not just a trans woman, I'm a businesswoman. And, you know, with me being an entrepreneur and having business transactions sometimes go south because of my Blackness and the space that my Blackness takes up. You know, like with me doing work in the social justice field with other queer and trans people, there's a camaraderie amongst us as queer and trans. But when my Blackness begins to take space, there's that issue, you know, so.
I want to get back to this issue of trans in a moment, but I can say that I can relate to, the experiences of being a Black woman entrepreneur. I've had a consulting firm at one point. I had a business partner, and we had to navigate that space in so many creative ways, I'll say, much more creative ways than I think some of our white male colleagues had to navigate that space, and so it's interesting to hear you say that. But we learned to work it out and be creative about it. So we have a kind of a broad audience with the show, and a lot of people don't know what transgender is. They hear the letters in our alphabet, LGBTQ, and I think people kind of roll over the T and don't really pause there long enough for people to really understand what that means. So, you know, not that you speak for all trans people, but what is your interpretation of the word transgender?
Most definitely. Me particularly, I don't identify as transgender. For me, I identify as a transsexual, intersex person.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know, and the difference between transgender and transsexual being that a transgender person is a person with an assigned gender who no longer identifies with that, you know, or, excuse me, as opposed to a transsexual person being a person who is also assigned a specific gender or sex, but doesn't identify with it, but they do physical things to modify their body and fix that separation that they feel between their body and their identity. And with me being a trans intersex person, for me, I feel that there is I believe there is a direct correlation between transsexuality and intersexness. Now, I feel as if we live in a world that has medicalized our bodies. So, you know, penis means male and vagina means female. But when you think about transsexuals, when I think about transsexuals and trans bodies, I see an obvious form of intersexness, you know, and intersexness being what people will ignorantly call hermaphrodites, you know, being a place of ambiguity, or if not ambiguity, I hate that word, ambiguity, but a place of amalgamation with the chromosomes and the body.
Now, a lot of people think of trans individuals as they associate that with whiteness a lot of times, and I've had to talk to folks, political leaders, and others about the reality of trans people being in the African American community and other communities of color, and being part of the rainbow as well as part of our broader communities of color. And I know you grew up on the south side of Chicago, so talk to me about that a little bit. I know we have a caller, but we'll take the call in just a moment. I just want to hear you comment on that.
I love the south side of Chicago. The place that made me, baby, and that's that piece. But I can say decidedly that I hate the rap that the south side of Chicago has garnered in lieu of recent events. You know, I feel as if people think about the south side of Chicago and they think about violence and they think about it via an isolated incident, as opposed to realizing that physical and community violence only exists when governmental violence perpetuates. So, you know, I love the south side of Chicago, and there's nothing anyone can tell me about it, because I don't know the south side of Chicago from the lens of a news crew. I know it from the perspective of a person who grew up there.
And it contributed to your fierceness, I'm
Thank
sure.
you.
So let's take the call. Hi, you're on the air.
Thank you. Hi, Kim. Hi, KOKUMO. I'm Solomon Arnold.
Hey, Solomon.
Hi. I am in the pleasure of seeing you guys live on TV, and I'm very excited. And I wanted to know, KOKUMO, how are you able to adapt to social norms with your gender identity? I realize that there's a lot of complexity surrounding them. I'm just wondering how you're able to deal with it on a daily basis.
Thank you for calling, Solomon. I'm going to let you listen to the answer off air, okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful question. And in a nutshell, the way I would answer that is, I recently wrote in a blog in response to Trayvon Martin that before I knew what trans meant, I knew how black felt. And this is the reason that I always make sure that my blackness and my transness are seen as symbiotic, because they don't exist exclusively. So for me, I learned how to accept myself as a trans woman by way of learning how to cope and accept myself as a black person. You know, once again, growing up on the south side of Chicago in poverty and seeing lack of everything. There's no need to be specific. A lack of everything. That became evident to me that this is the burden of blackness. So once I was able to conceptualize my blackness, I was able to conceptualize other parts of my personhood, my blackness, my dark-skinnedness, my plus-sizeness, and then my transness. You know, I hate the fact that when we think about media, there's always this belief that you're supposed to only offer these sound bites, you know, and just be post-racial, or just be monolithic, or just have one aspect of yourself that you can speak on. I'm sorry, I'm a complete human being. So once again, you know, my blackness and my transness are one, but my blackness prepared me to deal with my transness. And I walk proudly as a Black trans woman.
That is very interesting that you make that connection between race and other parts of your identity, because we're often asked at Affinity, and have been asked by even Black people, what do you lead with? Your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your gender identity. What is it? And it's our response is, we're complete people, so it's hard to separate one from the other, and it's hard to know where you're being oppressed at any given time. But you certainly lead with being Black and female, and that's what people see before they see anything else, and that kind of paints a picture for how they're going to respond and how they're going what assumptions they come to the table with when they see you. So it's very interesting that you say that. I know that you have also talked about your encounters with institutions and how the T is dealt with in LGBTQ institutions. And I want to point out to our viewers that KOKUMO was a scholar in our program. And it's a wonderful program that focuses on young women who are 18 to 24 and of African descent. And we as an organization have always been supportive of trans people, but have not had, always had within the leadership or within the immediate programming trans individuals. So I will say that you helped stretch us and helped us grow, and helped us to really be very intentional about serving the T as we should. But I know that you've talked about your encounters with LGBTQ institutions in general as a trans woman and a Black trans woman. So can you say more about that and the experiences that you've had?
Most definitely. The experiences I've had as a Black trans woman in the nonprofit industry, because this is an industry.
It is, yep.
Contrary to popular belief, have contributed to my growth. They have been hard. They have been scathing. They have been rude awakenings. One of the reasons that I always make sure that I amalgamate my Blackness into my transness is because when I was younger, I didn't understand that they are one and the same. And what I did was did work with organizations that understood that me being Black and trans was powerful, more so than I did. I worked with organizations who understood that my story and my body could create grants.
I got you.
Okay. I didn't know that my body could be commodified more so than the people who had the MSWs, the people who understood what foundations were looking for in the diversity of their demographics. So that's the reason I make sure to always state that I'm a Black trans woman, and do so with conviction, because the story I have of being a Black trans woman and a youth and the nonprofit industry has been an experience of manipulation and tokenism. And therefore, I happily work for myself as the CEO and founder of KOKUMO Media Inc. because I do the work that I do in the social justice industry because I honestly do want to contribute to the betterment of the communities I work with and I'm a part of. But I realized at some point that you can't necessarily do that when you're working with people who are muzzling you, who are tokenizing you, and I feel as if people don't want to realize that when we talk about LGBT, the T doesn't always stand for transgender, but also tokenism, because it gets to that point where you need that one trans person to be, considered progressive. And if that trans person is of color and feminine identified, then you just got $1 million grant. But that person of color, that trans woman of color, can barely feed ourselves. So, that's been my experience in the nonprofit industry. Now, once again, with my festival, TGIF, that takes place June 28th.
Which
from
is this
24
Sunday.
Union Park, yes. I have had the privilege of working with beautiful nonprofit organizations, who have supported me, like AIDS Foundation Chicago, Chicago House, the Broadway Youth Center, Affinity Community Services. But once again, that's from a different perspective,
Right.
because now I'm coming to them as the CEO
Yeah.
of a company, as opposed to an outreach worker, as opposed to a case manager, as opposed to a person who's looking to them for a steady paycheck.
Okay.
Instead, I'm coming to them from a place of partnership, which basically says we're on the same level. But typically,
Right.
when I speak to other people, other trans women of color, other trans identified people, other youth in the nonprofit industrial complex, there's always this case of being overworked and underpaid. And I feel as if it's just problematic, and it should be changed. And I think it can be changed by way of people empowering themselves to create their own platforms and their own institutions, period.
I know we have a caller. Yeah, let's take the call.
Yeah, hello. How y'all
Hello?
doing? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I want to go ask y'all, what did y'all think about the lady who was on the jury about the Trayvon Martin trial?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Okay. What did you think about the lady jury, the one in Florida, when she let George Zimmerman go off, but she said he got away with murder? What do you think about that?
Okay, we'll answer your question offline, okay? Do you are you familiar with what the caller is talking about? The juror who came out yesterday or the day before, who did a couple of interviews and talked about how she believes that Zimmerman got away with murder, but because of the parameters of the law and the instructions that they were given, they had to vote a particular way or consider certain things that may not have been the same things that we considered, those of us who were not on the jury. Andy, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I believe that capitalism and white supremacy and racism are the holy trinity of the United States government. And I feel that they operate not only as the holy trinity, because capitalism is a religion. I believe they operate as an engine, and capitalism is a train, and black bodies, black and brown bodies, and bodies of color, but specifically black bodies, are fed into the fire as fuel. So for me, I'm sorry. So for me, I feel as if you really want to create a change, do that while you have the ability to. Don't do it as an afterthought.
Yeah. And what I found interesting, is thinking about the show today and the parallels, and how, for a lot of people in the broader black community, they don't necessarily see the parallels between what's happening for folks through the black lens, but also through the LGBT lens, and how those are quite similar. I think about, the horrible situations of many trans women of color. I read a statistic the other day that talked about violence towards LGBT people, and how 70% of the folks on the receiving end of that violence are trans women of color. And trans women of color are being killed, and people just are not paying attention to that. And while I think it is very important for all of us to lift that up, I also think it's important for us to talk about all the wonderful things and wonderful opportunities, and how people have made a way out of no way to not only survive, but, as you say, to thrive. And so I want you to talk about the importance of the event that's coming up on Sunday to you, and what made you want to do this TGIF event. And this is the second year now. First year was very successful. 300 people or more came to the event. Only thing like it in the world, as you told me. And you're doing it. And so tell me about that and the importance of that event for all folks.
Thank you. TGIF, which stands for Trans, Gender Nonconforming, Intersex Freedom was created out of a dire need to have space that I can take up. You know, that's the unfortunate part about being Black, about being of color, about being a woman, is that these identities and these experiences and these bodies aren't allocated space. We find ourselves having to slither through cracks and walk into rooms balancing things as if we're at the circus all the time. We never have the ability to exist holistically, multidimensionally. And that's why TGIF exists. Furthermore, as a Black trans woman, I got tired of going to pride events and feeling as if my body was breaking the law. You know, I got tired of feeling as if there was no place for me. So simply put, as a trans woman of color, as a TGI person, I wanted to create a space where we could all commune. And specifically, I didn't want to create a pride event because for me, pride events are superfluous. And for me, they're also teetering on the brink of being obsolete because, you know, it gets to a point where you can only party for so long. You know, it gets to a point where you have to assert your political agenda. There comes a point where you have to develop a political agenda, and TGI people don't have one. And if we do, it definitely isn't recognized. And that's why at TGIF, which takes place July 28th from 12 until 4 at Union Park in Chicago, we will talk about transcending pride, evolving movements, what that means for us as TGI people of color and allies to develop our own agenda to the point where when CC McDonald is wrongfully imprisoned, we have the political power to do something, you know?
Tell people who CC is.
CC McDonald is a Black trans woman from the Midwest who is currently in prison because she basically defended herself against a bunch of racist white men who attempted to kill her, you know, and I feel as if...
And she's the one put in jail.
Exactly. So, you know, I feel as if when TGI people of color and their allies can collectivize in the same way that gay white men, quite frankly, have, and in the case of Trayvon Martin, Black people have, and people in general, when we have that ability to say this is wrong and we want action, I feel like that's the reason TGIF happens. That's the reason TGIF happens and will continue to happen. TGIF will take place in Chicago as the hub, as the place to convene for us to exercise our power. You know, this isn't a pride event. You know, this is us. This is our March on Washington. So I hope that we can see you all, you know, July 28th from 12 until 4 at Union Park in Chicago. There will be free food, but it'll be open to donations. There will be keynote addresses from trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex people of color and allies, and there will be music, and there will be community organizations that support TGI people of color and allies.
Beautiful. I think we have a caller. Hello, you're on the air. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Yes, hi. I would like to know, so I have a question, and I am concerned about the gay marriage. And I'm wondering, will the gay marriage cover all of the necessities that the LGBT community is needing as far as equality is concerned in America? Now, if it's not covering everything that the LGBT community is needing, we are barking up the wrong tree.
Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to try to give a good answer in the 1 minute that we have left. This time went fast. I'll answer your question off the air. So, fantastic question, and it's a question that we get all the time as Affinity, as an organization that serves LGBT people of color. It's like, why are all these resources being put into marriage equality, and is it enough? So we know that No one piece of legislation can address all of our issues, and that is definitely true in this case. And marriage equality does nothing for transgender people. However, marriage is the vehicle that this country uses to pass on assets, to recognize families, particularly when there are children involved. So Affinity is engaged in that struggle. It's not our number one priority, but the reality is that there are more lesbians of color who are impacted by this legislation than white gay men, because lesbians of color tend to have kids. They tend to be low income or lower income, and they need those extra protections that marriage affords. That does not mean that all issues will be resolved with marriage equality. We still have issues around employment. We know that in many parts of the country, trans and gay people can be fired legally because there's nothing protecting them. Fortunately, in Illinois, we have a very robust law that protects folks. We have health care issues and access to health care. We have just the daily lives that people are encountering when it comes to violence and access to other resources. So these are all issues that we have to continue to work on beyond marriage equality, although marriage equality is very important for many people. So unfortunately, we are at the end of the program. I don't know where the time went, folks, but thank you so much for your calls. We know that there were other folks who called and couldn't get in. Feel free to call us at the office or send us an email. The number is 773-324-0377. And there's our website, Facebook page information, and our Twitter handle. We'd love to hear from you. And you can find information about TGIF on our Facebook page and on KOKUMO's Facebook page. And until next month, be good to each other and have a great weekend.